Jay, welcome to Podcastina.
Thanks, Galina. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. Can we start with a little bit of background on how you got into your line of work?
Well, spent my career as a journalist, but let's go back to my childhood. Um, I wasn't a great student. I instead of listening to my teachers, I hung out in a library, just pulling down books at random and reading them. But all along, I wondered about the power that words had. There's a powerful word
It's just
right there.
sorry. That's Monty. He's a featured guest on the couple episodes. He's never invited,
Oh,
but he's always here.
well, Monty's welcome to criticize me. I love arguing with dogs. Uh, when I was when I was a kid, I thought soldiers sacrifice their lives to words. People do things they regret next morning because of the power of words. And all along, I wondered if I could learn what that power was. Well, that power of words is rhetoric, the art of persuasion, only it wasn't taught when back in my day. In fact, even when I was in college, I tried to find that power. Didn't take any courses in it. Went to grad school, realized academia and I wouldn't get along. So I lost the power of words there as well. I ended up working at Dartmouth College as an administrator and wandering through the stacks. I was really bored in my job with my old habit of pulling down books at random and just reading them, judging them all by their covers. There was one book, actually, two volumes, bound in red leather that stood out from the others. In this part of the library stacks where the fluorescent bulbs had been burned out, and there were cobwebs on the books. And I thought, who's not been reading this? Let's go. So I pulled down this red book and found it was signed by John Quincy Adams, who, before he became president of the United States, taught rhetoric at Harvard. And I actually traced who these students were. They were all like 15 to 17 years old, the future masters of the universe in this rapidly growing country in 1810. And he told these kids, all boys, to catch from the relics of ancient oratory those unresisted powers which mold the mind of man to the will of the speaker and yield the guidance of the nation to the dominion of the voice. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to get me some of these powers. I'm going to study this. And that set me on a tear of a couple of decades before my wife, being driven crazy by my lectures at the dinner table, told me to write my first book in rhetoric. And I have unfortunately not stopped talking about it around the dinner table since.
Well, then, with that rich background in all of this, I would love to hear your working definition of persuasion.
Persuasion, now, when it comes to rhetoric, persuasion has to do with allowing disagreement and trying to get something out of it, whether that's for selfish reasons or not, without violence or the threat of violence. Now, rhetoric is a dark art. It's a power that does make people regret things next morning. So it's up to you to be moral enough to use it without evil. But we can see throughout history, it's been used very effectively for all kinds of horrible things. Nonetheless, rhetoric lies behind democracy because only with this ability to argue without wanting to kill each other and to argue to make choices about things can we stop killing each other. And it led to the Enlightenment and the most peaceful era in human history, all of which I think is under threat right now. So it's time to get back to understanding how to disagree together.
It's a very complex issue, and I'm glad that you brought up that angle right away with it because I would love to know. First of all, for people that don't know the basics of rhetoric, can we just start there with the different types and how it's used?
Yeah, so there are three different kinds of rhetoric according to my man Aristotle, who wrote the original book on rhetoric. And it all has to do with the tenses. And what's really interesting to me is that whenever you're in a difficult conversation or somebody's angry with you, it's really useful to think about what tense you're in at the time. So if you screwed something up or somebody accuses you of it, they're probably talking in the past tense. And Aristotle called that forensic rhetoric. It's about forensics, crime and punishment, who done it. If they're calling you a name or saying how evil you are, they're in the using the present tense, which is the language of values, of what's bad and good and who's bad and who's good. Aristotle's favorite kind of rhetoric had to do with the future or choices that affect the future. And he called that deliberative rhetoric because it's deliberating about the decisions you want to make. So, if I can tell you a quick story,
Please.
when my son was 15 years old, he used up all the toothpaste in the bathroom. It was midwinter. I was wearing only a towel in the bathroom, and um, we live in New Hampshire where you don't want to go down in the basement to get a tube of toothpaste. So I yell through this closed door, George, who used up all the toothpaste? Being the father of a 15-year-old son, I knew who the culprit was. I hear this sarcastic voice on the other side saying, that's not the point, is it, Dad? The point is, how are we going to keep this from happening again? Now, he had heard at the dinner table me lecturing about one of the best ways to get out of trouble is to switch the tense to the future. Now, he had shown no evidence that he'd ever paid any attention to this. And so, in a way, he was flattering me, but while making fun of me and what had been teaching him. But he also switched the tense to the future, talked about solutions instead of the crime he had committed. I said to him, okay, George, you win. Now, will you please get me some toothpaste? And he went down into our freezing basement and got a tube. Now, who won that argument? He to this day he says he did because I said so. But I got a teenager to run an errand, and if you look at what are the ultimate goals of argument, it's get what you want and what you think is good for everybody. And I thought a full tube of toothpaste would be good for the entire family, especially me.
I see how, but I guess if, both people can look at it as a win-win, isn't that the ultimate use?
What's better than that? Yeah, and once you learn the tools of rhetoric, I think what you end up doing is understanding better the beliefs and expectations of your audience, even if that's a teenage son. And that need to understand, even for selfish reasons, so you can manipulate people, actually brings more understanding necessarily. And so ultimately, it can lead to good things as long as we're not evil about it.
Absolutely. Now, what would be the line? Like, if we're talking about evil, where do you draw the line between persuasion and manipulation?
Such a great question. I I have to be honest about this and not manipulative, telling you persuasion is manipulation.
Okay.
It is the same thing. You're using a set of tools in order to change people's minds from the beliefs or expectations they had before, whether they want them changed or not. Their mood, which you can put them in the mood to be more persuadable, or their willingness to do something or to stop doing something. Now, all these things have to do with changing people's minds, changing their brains. And, again, the most effective rhetoric is used on people who don't know they're being manipulated, which led me to, I'm sure we're going to talk about my latest book, which has to do with could you persuade yourself if the most effective persuasion means not being aware that you're being persuaded.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have many questions about that, but I guess let's stick to the arguing and the manipulation since we're on that. But knowing what you know, do you have like safeguards that you use, lines that you don't cross if you're trying to use these tactics to change someone's mind, but you don't want it to go too far?
Yeah, well, the first thing I do is to try to practice what the ancients called decorum. Now we think of decorum as like politeness and what fork to use or whatever at dinner, when really decorum is Latin for fitness, as in fitting in with your environment. And so here I am. I'm 70 years old. I am older than my clients are younger than my children. Um, and so, as a privileged old white man, I am less and less like people I speak with, or any audience I'll give a speech in front of. So, the art of decorum there has to do with telling myself I'm going to love the audience. Now, Marcus Tullius Cicero said, "The eyes are the windows to the soul," and he was the greatest rhetorician of all time, except for Aristotle. So I'm going to listen to him. And one of my sidelines is to uh, help clients win venture capital from VC firms, and along with the all the tools of manipulation, the last thing I say to them is, before you walk into the room, tell yourself you're going to love these people and start sending love beams out of your eyes. Now, this can seem pretty creepy over Zoom, I'll admit that. But and most people, my clients, think I've eaten some interesting gummy or something. But the few who actually listen and try to practice that come back saying, "I felt the love. I think we're going to win the business." And that's a powerful thing, this idea that you're genuinely interested in your audience and that you're going to enjoy being with them. You're going to find yourself getting along with people you may disagree with completely, politically, or who don't share your gender or race or ethnicity, or religion or whatever. And you're going to find they're human. So that's the most important thing that I do, because it also makes me behave better. I'm much more inclined to be not so much careful about the language I use, but more empathetic and more understanding and more agreeable, if anything. Which is, I'll tell you, really hard for anybody with a Y chromosome over 70.
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging that, and I really love what you said with the love beams analogy, because I am like a big proponent of manifesting and mindset, and I do believe that just going in, looking for the love and the positive interactions, it does kind of set you up for like a good cognitive bias where you're like, "Oh, I'm going to look for proof that this is a loving interaction."
That's brilliantly said. And, in these tribal days, we tend to do the opposite, right?
Right?
We look for harm, and it's, being offended by whatever someone is saying, or worse, thinking they must be evil and everything they're going to do by definition is evil. Yeah. I mean, it's not helpful
No,
for humanity.
it's definitely not. Can rhetoric help you change the mind of someone who, you feel like you can't change their mind, or it's like a really deeply held belief? Can you actually get around those?
The important thing, especially in this day and age of social media, is to look around. Have some peripheral vision when you get into any kind of disagreement with somebody, because the chances are, and this is the sad part about rhetoric, the chances are the person who is stock still in their belief, they're not going to change at all, and who's adamant and even offensive, probably isn't going to be anybody you're going to persuade. Certainly not in one session. So you got to think of a couple of things. One is, what's my real goal here? Am I really out here to, win the argument on points, or do I just want toothpaste? Um, the other thing to think about is, who else is persuadable who might be listening in? And I love to talk about Thanksgiving dinner and the inevitable uncle with opinions who shows up. I'm one, by the way. I love being the uncle with opinions. And a great solution to that kind of thing is, to be the grown up in the room and to be seen as the grown up in the room. Though, and so one way to win an argument with somebody who's not going to change is to confuse them. And the best way to do that is to ask questions. I call it aggressive listening, where you say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard it that way before. Where'd you get your facts?" And then ask, "Is this something that happened once somewhere I don't haven't even heard of? Or is this a trend? Is this something that's really increasing?" And then finally, "I'd love to know where you're getting your data. Like, what's the numbers here? Because I'm a numbers guy," or whatever. Now, research has shown really clearly that when people are forced to back up their opinions, they generally don't have much of a clue, and they'll back down a little bit. They won't change their minds, but they'll be confused, and that's a win in my book. And then you can say who wants pie, and everybody's happy. The other thing is to think about when somebody is not going to be moved from their opinion is to think, what do I want out of this relationship with this person? Maybe nothing, in which case it's like, thanks for sharing, bye. Or you can say, um, I really care about you. We're going to disagree about this, but let's share this over time. Let's keep talking. And don't try to change them right from the get go, but say, love to hear more from you in the future. But I'm more interested in, how the kids are doing or whatever. A relationship comes first. Aristotle, of all people, Mr. Logic himself, said that. He said, if your audience, even if it's one person, likes and trusts you, they're much more likely to not just listen to your opinion, but have their minds changed. So work on that first.
If you're in an argument with someone and you do care about the relationship, how do you know when to walk away?
The best thing to do if you can get away with it is to tell them you love them. There was this woman girl back in high school. I guess we were all girls and boys back then. Paula Klein. She was so beautiful, this like flaming red hair, and she was so kind and wise and smart. I mean, just like a higher order of being. And obviously, I had this huge crush on her and could barely even speak to her. Well, I don't remember any kind of election. I don't think there was one, but I ended up head of the student government. And I'm not humble bragging here. I don't know how I ended up. I think no one else wanted it. And the principal didn't like me. So I ended up head of student government. And at one point, like I'm in front of the student council. Nothing's getting done. Nobody's listening. And I just started ranting, saying, we are so useless. This is terrible. Like, why are we all wasting our time here anyway? I probably went on for a while. And Paula, who was on the student council, who really should have led us all, interrupted me and said, Jay, we love you, which probably wasn't true. Um, but I turned so many shades of red. And for all I know, I ran out of the room. The rest of it, I don't remember. I was in some kind of fugue state. But what she was doing was a very effective rhetorical technique of interruption, which is she reframed the issue from how useless we are in a body or what mood I was in to the relationship, at least Paula claimed to have with me. By the way, I don't think I ever spoke to her after that. I was too shy. I regret that too because I don't know, maybe she did love me. In any case, what she was doing was getting me to shut up, and that was a brilliant way to do it.
That's incredible because I would never think of that as necessarily a tool of rhetoric, and yet I think I've accidentally used it.
Oh, it probably gotten away with it too.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
bet.
if I did it, forget about it. I mean, it would just come off as creepy.
Is that, would you say, like a go-to, or do you have any rhetorical tools that are like your go-tos on a regular basis?
Well, and I hear this the most from people who read my books that the one tool they walk away with is switching to the future. That whole thing about tense. And the reason for that is, I mean, you imagine yourself in the workplace. You'll often hear people say, "We tried that; it didn't work," or "Yeah, we're not going to let you do that because you screwed it up last time." Or you hear people, say, "You're a terrible manager," or "You're really bad at what you do," or "I'm not going to listen to you," or "You have no right to say anything to me because you're the not the right gender or race or whatever." You can say, call me anything you want, or whatever happened, let's talk about the problem at hand and how we're going to deal with it. That's my go to. And, when the conversation gets difficult, I think, what's the relationship? What's my goal? What tense am I in?
I would love to try to apply this to like a real world example. So, let's say I'm going into my boss's office and I'm trying to advocate for myself to get a raise. What tools should I reach for if I'm getting some pushback? What's the most effective way to go about it?
Well, let's go back to Aristotle, who said that the important thing to get a decision out of your boss is um, what Aristotle called the advantageous. So it's not, if rhetoric had a motto, it would be, it's not about you, it's about your audience. So you would have to pitch that raise in a way that makes the boss feels it's to his or her advantage. So, there's got to be a good reason to give you a raise other than the fact that you need the money or that you even deserve it. So there are several ways you can do it. One is through a threat. I notice that all the men around here are getting paid better than me. That's a potential lawsuit. That's to the boss's advantage to give you a raise. A kinder, gentler way to do it would be to say, you said to me once, boss, that you got to protect the talent. And I think I've proven to you by now that I'm talent. So show me some love here. I think it's time we talked about a salary increase. Now, that's to that's to the boss's advantage, not yours. And we all make the mistake, especially when we're teenagers, to say, "I really, really want this," and doesn't work. The second thing Aristotle said to do, though, in order to get, so the boss may say, "Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, that's in the cards next June." You are going to get at the very least a cost of living increase, and that counts as a raise. What you need to do at that point is to build desire, and that's how you get any kind of action, is to build desire. And so you have to put the boss in the mood to give you a raise much more quickly. And you can do that with any kind of emotion. One would be fear. Like, I have to tell you, I got to confess something to you. I'm getting real serious feelers from other companies. Or, I heard from a recruiter the other day, and it's not the first one. If it's true that you can say that, and that, I would love it here. I really want to stay, but you're making it difficult for me. That's building the desire and emotion in order to pull the trigger on that raise.
Okay, to go further into that, are there any emotions that we should be avoiding eliciting? What's not an effective way to get someone into an emotional state?
The answer to any question about rhetoric is that depends. It all
Sure.
depends on the situation. So, the thing is, fear, Aristotle said, is a temporary emotion, and so is anger. But, social media is kind of able to trigger fear and anger on an almost permanent basis. It just keeps churning these emotions again and again. Uh, in general, though, the problem with fear is that it blocks decisions. When people in a fearful state are just going to hunker down and not make any choices at all. So that's probably one in general to avoid. Plus, it's not good for people. You're not doing good for humanity or for your long-term reputation. Raising fear in people. A better thing to think about is how to tamp down emotion in a room, because that can be, now desire is really important. If you can get somebody to lust after whatever product you're selling, or whatever you're going to do, then good, that's a great emotion. But in general, if you can get people to calm down and feel powerful, and maybe even in a state where they're sort of relaxed and smiling, that's, Aristotle called that a state of receptivity, and cognitive behaviorists call it cognitive ease, which is the most persuadable state of all. I call it the Homer Simpson state because it's also kind of dumb. Your brain isn't very active at the time. If you remember back when you had to take math exams, that was a bad time to persuade yourself in anything because your brain was really working overtime. And people resist persuasion when they're thinking too hard. So having an easy, mild emotion that's generally a happy one where you feel kind of in control and not threatened, that's the most persuadable state.
If you are using these tools of persuasion, is it different? Are you going to reach for different tools when you're in an argument with one person versus trying to use it on a group?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not that different. What persuades one person really can persuade a group. The difficulty, though, especially in the internet era, is you never quite know who your audience is, and you don't know the timing of your argument. In a way, it's kind of like book publishing. I published my first book on rhetoric. Thank you for arguing back in 2007, and I had some hilarious jokes in there, according to me, that you really didn't play too well as time went on. Um, at the same time, I started making references to certain words. The word seduction is really interesting because in 2007, it basically meant advertising. People didn't have this, violent sexual connotation. Originally, it did. Seduction meant rape. And now it's kind of coming around to that same meaning. And so there's a passage in that book where I talked about my attempt to seduce my wife after she came home from work by wearing my best cardigan sweater, which my wife said made my eyes look bedroomy. Now, like that was just come on, it's a guy trying to prove that he was as available as the lawyers my wife was working with. She was, the VP of a law school, for crying out loud. Like, how am I going to compete as some stay-at-home writer? And so, hence the sweater. By the second edition, younger people especially were saying that's really offensive. You're doing horrible things to your wife by putting on that sweater. So I had to change the language, and now multiply that by a billion. When you do anything on social media, you never know who your audience is going to be. So if you're telling a joke that's very tribal or that might occur to a few people, be very careful because you're going to be offending people and it's going to come back at you.
Yeah, there's kinda no way to avoid that. I mean, as a comedian, it's like, I'm never gonna be able to please everybody. Pleasing everyone means writing 0 jokes and putting out 0 content, so it's kind of just like a pick your battles situation with that, and it's a matter of also, I think, just keeping an eye on, like, with your example out of your book, that wasn't offensive in 2007, and so I think what gets lost in the sauce is people will judge older work by the standards of today, and you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and that's sad.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? And I got to admire you for leading that dangerous career of yours as a comedian.
Thank you.
Um, but anybody, first of all, two things to learn from comedians. One is this idea that you learn from failure. You're just going to bomb, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
Oh, yeah.
and you're going to tell the same jokes in the same way 2 nights in a row at a comedy club. And one night you'll kill, the next night you bomb. And anybody who tries to give public lectures, same thing. I mean, I tell the same kinds of stories, and sometimes they hit and sometimes they don't. The other thing, though, to learn from comedians is this whole improv technique of yes and it totally works, doesn't it? Like it's a great collaborative technique in any situation.
Well, I think it goes back to, and this is such an old idea because it's from like Dale Carnegie, right? When friends and influence people, you don't want to get anyone on the defense ever because they're just immediately going to kind of shut down. And I'm wondering to what extent rhetoric can be used to try to keep people out of defense mode. It's probably like a very tight line that you're walking.
Yeah, I call it the art of agreeability, which is this um, appearance of agreeing, even when you don't. And the
Mm,
yes and can get you there. Like,
okay.
right? All you're doing. So, the most important tool, if you don't want somebody to be angry, is to reframe the conversation without the other person really even noticing it. So, for example, let's talk dishwasher loading, which ruins marriages. Um, by the way, I have to say, it's one of my greatest skills. I am a brilliant dishwasher loader. I am. The dishes all get clean. I can cram more dishes in there and they all get clean in just like this precise way where unloading them, you just all the forks are the right kind of forks. They all go in the right kind of place. My wife, on the other hand, who I love dearly, is a brilliant woman, very accomplished woman. I swear she stands back and throws the dishes into that dishwasher. It breaks my heart. So now, how do I have a conversation about this? Well, one is to try to use humor about it, and praise her many skills. And so I will say to her, I can see how great you are at improvisation by the way you load that dishwasher, and I can see it's a really important outlet for you in that you are so well organized. You always have done your homework better than anybody in the room. It's what you made you so successful. And so every now and then you just got to get your wild side out. Now, my saying this does allow, now that's reframing the conversation, by the way, between my a genuine upset at the chaos in this dishwasher, um, which just challenges my whole view of reality. Um, Two, this humorous conversation about my wife's lack of skill. Now there are better things that you can do, but that's just what I came up with because I wanted to brag about dishwasher loading.
It's a good example though, because it's really a lot of people can relate to that. I can relate to that too. I have like a very type A way of loading the dishwasher. All the forks are together, all the same plates are together so that they can be then put back in the same way. And it does
Oh,
drive me
bless you!
nuts.
You're doing the Lord's work. That's all I could say.
Yeah. Us type A's got to stick together.
Yes, we do. Now the thing is, she is type A. That's the thing. There are certain things that people do, especially around the household, when it comes to habits, where they really reveal other sides of themselves. I think there's something to this. I really do. I mean, I would drive my wife crazy about how I fold laundry. Apparently, I am as chaotic at folding laundry as she is with a dishwasher. So, I mean, the thing too, I mean, when we're talking about how to get along with people when people are upset or whatever, humor is a tricky thing, as you all people know. You and not people often aren't very good at it, and the worst people are the people probably like me who think they're good at it and maybe aren't. It's really important to think about if you're going to reframe a conversation, try to reframe the mood at the same time. You're going to now. What do I mean by reframing? I should talk a little bit about that. It
Please.
basically means what the issue is all about. So I speak with high school students several days a week, um, in the one high school course that teaches rhetoric, AP English language. Really bright kids, inevitably. One of these, and one of the things I talk about is that, all right, you're learning all these wonderful tools of classical rhetoric and studying Aristotle and Cicero and all those people, but really, let's talk about how to manipulate your siblings or your parents. That's what this is really about, and that will make you better at rhetoric if you think that way. Well, one girl asked me, she said, I came home from school the other day, and I went to get a snack. My big sister was sitting there at the kitchen table doing her homework or whatever. And I started making myself a peanut butter sandwich. And my big sister looks up and she says, "You are so selfish. That's the last of the peanut butter, isn't it? And you always do this. You don't think of anybody else. You're just going to use that peanut butter without even asking me." And so this girl asked me, what should I have said in reply? And this is when I brought up reframing. And I said, one of the greatest things, make sure that there's a table between you and your sister. This might not go well. But I said, instead of responding to what she said to you, look really sympathetic. Try not to smile. You really have to look sympathetic and say, are you okay? Now that's reframing. So is this about peanut butter? Or is this really about that lame boyfriend of yours? Are you having problems? In other words, you're now reframing the subject from peanut butter to the fact that her anger comes not from your selfishness, but rather from what's clearly a deep psychological problem on the big sister's part. Now, obviously, that's not going to bring about a calm relationship with a big sister. You're just doing this out of pure evil, which sometimes you have to do with a sibling. I think you're forgiven in the long term for this. And besides, she deserves it. So now that is reframing. And there are ways to reframe where you calm people down and do better, but it's probably, it's the number one thing political marketers use is this idea of reframing. That, guns used to be for recreation and hunting, right? Target practice and hunting. The NRA said so until they decided it would be much more useful to sell lots more guns and do whatever you want with the Second Amendment in order to make guns about personal protection. That's a reframe and an absolutely brilliant one. One of the best of all time.
I bet that gets used a lot by institutions who are just mostly interested in money and getting that bottom line up as much as possible. I would imagine that reframes are all over marketing.
Well, they are, and one important kind of marketing reframing you see a lot has to do with Aristotle's idea of ethos, which is your reputation or your brand when it comes to a corporation. So you'll see brands do this all the time. Their mission is shareholder value, right? Profit, as it should be. That's what capitalism is all about. But you'll see them reframe a product into a cause, right? So these aren't socks. These are socks for the homeless. This is going to warm the feet of people around the world, which is literally done. Now, most of the socks obviously are being sold for a profit, and that company wouldn't exist if it had to, if it was simply producing socks for the homeless. GE had one of the greatest slogans of all time, General Electric, when they came up with, "We bring good things to life." They're selling light bulbs, but and doing a lot of good for humanity selling light bulbs, no question about it, but that's not what they were for. That's framing.
Any companies that you see as the worst perpetrators of manipulation tactics or dangerous
Oh, you
ones?
get you're getting me in trouble now. Well, have to. I mean, come on. You're already thinking tech, aren't you?
Well, of course, they want us arguing, like that whole thing that you touched on earlier with they get us in this fear and anger state, and then they feed you more of that because that's what you're interacting with so they can push more ads on you. They don't care that they
Well,
made you mad.
yes, absolutely, and you see that especially in politics. But let's go back to tech for a minute here. The thing is, if you look at, first of all, I got in a lot of trouble with my latest book, talking about Elon Musk, because I talk about how to get in touch with your soul, which is your truest self. And I argue that nobody's in better touch with their soul than Elon Musk. You don't have to like that soul at all. But that guy's doing exactly what he's meant to be, even if it means like destroying the world. But he genuinely thinks that he is doing this for the service of humanity. I mean, he wants that colony on Mars that will save humanity for all time. He wants to implant stuff in people's brains so they'll get along better with our future AI robot overlords. So now you see this throughout tech, this sort of messianic vision of what we're really doing is improving humanity. And, who knows? Maybe they can. But on the other hand, what you're seeing is they're acquiring unbelievable wealth and doing nothing to benefit other people. And you see this, like, so economists will point out that California is this unbelievable machine for wealth, which makes America so incredibly wealthy. Europe is panicking because they don't have the big tech companies, the way America does. But if you look at the rest of America outside of California and Seattle, Washington, they're not, tech doesn't exist nearly to the degree it does there. But if you look at Californians and Washingtonians, they're not making more money than the rest of the country. In other words, all that wealth is increasingly concentrated in one place, and that's in tech. Okay, well, what are they doing about it, and what are they saying about it? What they're saying is this is going to bring about, this great new modern life. Or just as cynically, they're saying This is going to destroy us all. That shows how powerful this stuff is. Let's make more. So, I mean, I think if you're talking about how to manipulate people, uh, what they're failing to do, though, is win over people to their side, in part because being human, they can't resist having trophy wives and incredibly expensive houses and yachts and things like that, and making complete idiots of themselves. Now, so they should hire me at a huge price, and I'll help them create more evil with a good reputation. I can be I can be bought. I'm kidding, of course, but there's another element to this that I call the remora economy. Was that the remoras are these fish that feed off the gleanings of sharks. They're the little fish you always see hanging around sharks.
Oh.
So I tell people who are looking to make money, it's like, okay, reframe this situation of wealth inequality. It's going to be there. If you can do anything to vote the right way to diminish it, wealth inequality does destroy civilizations. It does. It's history has proven this. Meanwhile, make as much as money as you can manipulating those rich bastards. That's my advice.
That's really good advice. In that, is there any kind of protection that the average person can use of like recognizing a tool of rhetoric being used on them and being like, hey, I see this for the BS that it is, and I'm going to note it and I'm going to stop paying attention?
The way to think about this is to think about the doom scrolling, or the just plain scrolling we do with our phones. And if you're thinking about the negative emotions that come out of that, it's really important to get logical. Like the best thing to use against emotion is logic. And I know I'm getting in the weeds here and extremely nerdy, but inductive logic is the cure for doom scrolling. And by that, I mean Aristotle's um, idea of induction, which has to do with when you see something, a piece of news, you think, what is it? First of all, is it real? That's your first question. If you suspect it at all, move on. Um, don't pay any attention to it if you don't even know it's real. Secondly, what's it made of? In other words, who produced this thing? Is it somebody who's got an agenda, who's going to try to sell you something or put you in some kind of mood? And if it's something that you think might be used against you, again, you can move on. No matter how seductive this is and how cool the video is or whatever, you stay logical. The third thing you do is you think, um, is this relevant to me? Does this affect me in any way? Is this going to help me do something? Or is it just surely pleasurable and it's worth it? More worth my time than talking to a loved one, say. And then finally, you think, is if this is news, is it a trend? Is this something that's increasing or is it something that happened once? And you'll hear politicians say over and over, this one thing happened perpetrated by this one person, and therefore that entire group is responsible for, crime or horror. And we see that both on the left and the right, although increasingly more on the right. And, but on the left as well. And again, you don't have to put up with that. You just have to think, okay, what would Aristotle do? And,
Mhm.
go back to these ideas of forms, as he called them.
I love that, and there's so many parallels there with even just doing like, looking at things from a scientific research standpoint. Like, you hear one example of something, that's anecdotal evidence. On the chain of hierarchy for good evidence, anecdotal is at the very bottom.
Yeah. And, on the other hand, storytelling can be a great way to persuade people, and it can be used for good as well. I mean, as you know. So I actually advise a group of scientists who obviously are going through big problems right now. Scientists in general are less and less trusted. If the science doesn't agree with the politics, you get in trouble no matter what your evidence is doing, and you get your funding withdrawn. And young scientists in general are really troubled by this, obviously, where their career is going to go that they're so passionate about. And I tell scientists how to tell a story. Like, don't talk about your findings, talk about your discoveries and the questions that come out of them. This is a mystery, and it's a mystery that will never be solved, but it just gets richer and richer all the time. The plot keeps thickening. And I tell how to tell an inductive story where you collect evidence along the way and you interpret it along the way. And at the end, you have an idea. It's called a theory, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the end all be all of science. But on the other hand, what you found is so interesting, the rest of the public should not only be interested in it, but in that kind of mood that makes them believe that you're right, whatever you're interpreting. And it works, totally works. And I'm seeing young scientists out there becoming genuine influencers as a result of that. It'll work for all of us. Storytelling is great. I mean, I I try telling stories myself because nobody else listens. Nobody will listen to me otherwise.
No, it's definitely a useful tool because people can relate to that, and hopefully that's how we kinda get science back to where it's supposed to be as a trusted source of information. I did wanna switch gears because your new book is about self-persuasion, and I wanted to talk about, like, how would you define self-persuasion, and why is it useful?
Well, so originally, I only went on this mission of self persuasion because my wife told me to. Um, as I mentioned, she's very smart. I do everything she says. But I was in a, this was some years ago, and I was in a terrible mood, like depressed, self pitying. Um, I also was suffering from this ailment, hip ailment, very common to old people, called snapping hip syndrome. I won't get into it, but it was literally crippling, and doctors were wondering if I'd be able to walk normally. Uh, Surgery seemed to be out. Um, my wife said, you've been using these tools of persuasion in your consulting practice, and helping manipulate markets around the world. And have you thought of using it on yourself? And of course, I said no, because rhetoric needs an audience, and it works best if the audience doesn't know these tools of manipulation. So, and besides, who am I talking to? Myself? That's creepy. So, but she said, think about it, which is her way of saying, shut up and just do your homework. So I did. I took a deep dive into the books of Aristotle I'd never read before. I always go back to Aristotle. Um, and I found his weirdest book, called On the Soul. Now, Aristotle's idea of the soul is not what people learn in church or temple or wherever. In fact, he thought your soul dies when you do. Years later, the philosopher Rene Descartes in the 17th century said he found the soul, because Aristotle had wondered whether it's actually an organ in your body, or is it connected to something larger than yourself through an organ in your body? And Rene Descartes said, I found it. It's the pituitary gland. Now, I'm no biologist, but I, I'm not sure that's where your soul lies. Anyway, your soul, as Aristotle described it, is your purest self. It's the self you wish you saw in the mirror. It's the self that's separated from those daily habits that make you feel less noble. And so that's your audience. I realized that was my audience. That if I could have a conversation with my soul and try to persuade my soul that I'm as good as it is, that would, in a weird way, get me better habits, get over this self-pity, and possibly accomplish something. So as part of this, I decided I'm going to test all the tools of persuasion on my soul, and I'm going to do this over a year. And I had been a passionate trail runner back in my youth, before everything went south with my body. And decided that I was going to try to be the first person over age 50 to run up this particular mountain in New Hampshire in fewer minutes than I was old in years. Now, this mountain is used by Olympians from around the world to test their fitness, their VO2 and their lactate removal and all that stuff. Only a dozen people had ever run their age to the top, which is to run it in fewer minutes than they were old in years. Two physiologists.
Sorry.
No, it's true. I'm not lying. Two physiologists had said they thought that was impossible for anybody over 50, like physically impossible. So I thought, this is great. I'm going to do this stupid and pointless and really hard attempt. I'm going to spend a year trying to do it, and I'm going to use all the tools of manipulation on my soul in order to try to accomplish this. So, my wife, for a while there, I'm sure was very sorry she had suggested this because our income went down, and it all started, and I won't go into detail, but it started with this one doctor who had this experimental procedure he'd only attempted once that involved uh, several hundred shots of dextrose sugar water in my hips and glutes in order to kind of confuse the nerves, flood the zone with pain, so that the pain in my hips would stop me from sort of clenching. It totally worked, but at the time, of course, I would have told the doctor anything. It was torture, but I reframed it at the time, thinking this is training, first of all, and secondly, the ancients taught that suffering is a skill. It's not something you feel sorry for. It's your ability to withstand pain or harm is proves your noble soul. Aristotle wrote a lot about this. The second thing I did was to try to get in touch with my soul. Like, what is it? And your soul is what separates you from your daily habits, your appetites, as Aristotle so rightly put it. And so one of the things I thought was, all right, where are the places I want to go on vacation? And this is by the way, it's a great exercise because it's fun to plan a vacation. And you think, all right, what are the bucket list items? And if they're the sorts of things that people do, like the prestigious thing that absolutely requires the selfie on Instagram in front of some dumb building or painting, that's your appetite. That's probably not your soul. But if you really love the idea of going someplace like off season or someplace nobody's ever heard of, it's not prestigious, but warms your heart thinking about it, that's where your soul is. And the same thing applies to stuff that you do that's not prestigious. It's not going to earn you anything, but really satisfies you somehow. That's what your soul is. And I found that by using that, making that discovery, I was getting more and more in touch with myself than I maybe had ever been. Now, I needed to because I had to lose 28 pounds and I was fairly skinny to begin with, but I needed to, hoist as little up that mountain as possible. I ended up working out 4 hours a day. Um, and it was super hard. Running up a mountain is painful. But on the other hand, as I progressed, I found myself getting happier because I actually was doing what I genuinely wanted to do, which was to prove myself to be the athlete I never was.
I wonder what you would think of this quote. I just came across it on Pinterest, and it said, "Suffering is you having an argument with reality."
Huh. I had to think about that. First of all, it's really interesting. Now, any rhetorician will tell you, you have to define all those terms. What do you mean by suffering? What do you mean by reality? And what do you mean by arguing? So, because I have a feeling my definitions of all three might be a little different
Yeah,
from
maybe.
the person who wrote that.
I wonder if
Because,
they Oh, go ahead.
well, the thing is, okay, reality is like what hits you upside your head, right? It's the stuff that happens to you. Okay, so all right, I'll agree if that's what reality means. I'll agree with that. That's reality, no question about it. Okay, so is suffering an argument? In which case, what's your point? Like, what are you trying to say to reality? I mean, you trying to change it? That's not going to happen. On the other hand, you may be making an argument with your soul, and that's worthwhile to say, hey, you think I'm a loser, soul? I'm going to withstand this and I'm going to come out better from it. I'm going to learn from it, and I'm also going to come out stronger. Now, that's an argument, but it's not with reality.
Maybe it was in the Buddhist sense of suffering as resistance to acceptance.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about Buddhism is now I'm all with the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. But what I've discovered more and more over the past few years as I've done more research is that the ancient Greeks, particularly that branch of philosophy called the Epicureans, were having a lot of communications with the Buddhists. And if you compare the two, Buddhism and Epicureanism, they're really, really very much alike. Now, they have their areas of disagreement that are probably cultural. But the fact is, we call India India because the Greeks called it that um, back many thousands of years ago. And so they were there. They were on these trading ships back and forth. Now, why am I bringing this up? It's in part because the idea of suffering was a huge topic with both the early Buddhists and with the Epicureans. Now we think of Epicureanism as like cuisine. It wasn't. The Epicureans ate porridge. Um, they're, they had a philosophy of happiness. The purpose of life was happiness, and the way you achieve happiness is to get rid of all your fears, which can be the fear of having enough money. The fear of God was one. The fear of God's punishment was one. The fear of pain was one, and the fear of death was another. Now, Buddhism has a lot to do with those characteristics as well. Now, the individual tenets of that, the Epicureans did talk about resistance, but they were talking about resistance to an emotion, um, not so much with acceptance. And they weren't big into acceptance either. They wanted to avoid the need to accept anything.
Hmm.
Which, by the way, I'm not exactly an Epicurean myself, nor am I a Buddhist, so I may not be given either much justice. Are you one? Are you a Buddhist?
Not fully, but I do read a lot of that philosophy because I think there's a lot of good in there that can be cultivated. And as someone who's kind of prone to anxiety, I think the lessons of acceptance are ones that I need to hear repeatedly so that hopefully something sinks in and sticks.
Well, so read The Nature of Things, which
Mm,
is one of the greatest poems of all time. First of all, parts of it are hilarious. And it is a poem of Epicureanism. You may find yourself getting a lot out of it. I wish more people like Buddhism is really hot now, but so is Stoicism,
yes.
which is and it's funny how many Stoics are buying my book, thinking it's about Stoicism, which it really isn't. But bless them, I hope they keep buying. Um, but Epicureanism I find much more attractive because the Stoics said you need to lead a life of virtue. That'll make you happy, but that's not the point. The point is an entirely moral life, living the good life, meaning doing good and living righteously. And their suffering is a way of proving your goodness. Okay, that's fine, but I prefer going straight to happiness. Like take the shortcut.
Yeah.
And one way to do that is to put yourself in the position where you can allow happiness while at the same time not showing courage, but simply eliminating the cause of fear. And that's, I mean, that I find that part of Epicureanism to be the source of great happiness for me.
That's remarkable. I'm just very impressed at the idea of, taking on such a huge challenge of going up that mountain and dealing with an injury. And I'm wondering what was the most, like, the biggest takeaway from that lesson for you? Because I think with self persuasion, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of view it as when people need to overcome something or when they have like a lot of obstacles to overcome, I find that some people just tend to have like a lower threshold for discomfort and they cannot talk themselves past that. So, what is the tool that you used? What's the best tool so someone can raise that threshold and get beyond themselves, beyond that self talk of, I'm in too much pain. This is too hard. I can't do it.
Well, so first of all, what are you trying to accomplish? And I think one of the problems we have, especially as Americans, is that we're often giving ourselves too modest a goal to overcome whatever difficulty we have. I just want to relieve the pain for an hour. I'm going to take a pill. And when it comes to exercise, and by the way, my book isn't about exercise. It's just the experiment I did. Um, But it's really important to do what I call a hyperbole, capital H hyperbole, which comes from the ancient Greek, meaning to throw beyond. It's bole is where we get the word ball from, means to throw. Hyper obviously means above or beyond. So the idea of thinking of yourself as a dog who can throw its own ball and chase after it, it's just, first of all, it's fun to think about. You're doing that. But if you look at doctors, they'll say, try to walk for 20 minutes a day. It won't do you much good at all, but it's the most I can get out of you probably. And so people aren't going to do it because what's the point? You're not going to accomplish much. On the other hand, some people are going to say, I'm going to train for a marathon. I'm going to do it in 2 weeks, and then of course they're ramping up much too quickly for this. What they're trying to accomplish is too painful. Or on the other hand, they simply think they identify with their pain, and that's worst of all. The Epicureans taught you how not to do this. So the other thing besides dishwasher loading that I'm really good at is napping. I am a champion. I took a nap that's why I'm drinking coffee. I took a nap just before this. Um, Now, when I tell people this, people will inevitably say, well, I don't nap or I'm not a napper. Now, that's identifying with a failure. I mean, because most people would love to nap if they could have the time and the wherewithal and the ability actually to fall asleep during the day. But, if you're identifying with it, of course you're not a napper. You literally don't nap. Same thing with it. I'm not musical, so I could never play the guitar. I identify with my failure. There are ways to change that identity by thinking what is getting in touch with your soul and really thinking about what you want to do. So there are two things Aristotle taught having to do with changing a habit or you know making yourself accomplish something. I call it the lure and the ramp. In Greek it's a lot more complicated. So the lure is a big goal or some delight you want to give yourself at the end. The ramp means starting very slowly and don't do the hard stuff first. So for me, when I was training to rub up a mountain, the first thing I did was to wait until the fall when daylight saving time turned into standard time. And the United States government granted me an extra hour of the day. And I simply got up at the same time as I had before, which meant an hour earlier in standard time. And then I set it back another hour to the point where I'd been getting up at 6. I now get up at 4. And I still do, by the way. But which is terrible because who's around at 4? And what's worse, like everybody wants to party and go to dinner way beyond my bedtime. So I just declared my own time zone. I call it J light saving. Um, so that's the first thing. Declare my time zone. It has nothing to do with training, but it gave me time. The next thing I did was I declared that time my time first thing in the morning. And I just read books for fun. I turned off my phone, no connections, and just read books, which I found satisfying. After a while, as part of my training, I started reading inspiring books about running and trail running or the outdoors. And then I switched to physiology books. I'm ramping up. The physiology books got so boring that starting to run outside sounded good. Like that sounded more attractive. So I strapped on a headlamp and started running in the dark a little bit, running, walking, walking, running. And then after a while, I started running. And then I put in resistance training as part of this. And then I got serious. And a little bit of exercise turned into 4 hours a day, but not all at once. It just was so gradual. I ratcheted up a little bit. And that came right out of Aristotle. Magnificent goal that I was, by the way, using other tools of manipulation in order to tell myself that this stupid goal was really the most amazing thing I'd ever thought of. And then that the training itself was super exciting and I was learning stuff all the time, even if I wasn't. Pure manipulation. And then on the other hand, seeing the success along the way. I mean, the fact that I went from not exercising at all to 4 hours a day itself was an accomplishment. Finally, when you think about a big goal, the goal you should set should be one where you fail up. Like if you ended up failing, you're still better off than you were. And I knew if I didn't run my age, and I'm not going to tell you whether I did, you have to read the book, at the top of the mountain, I would still be the trail runner I'd hoped to get back to. And I do it to this day. I mean, I turned 70 last month, and I'm still outdoors and still enjoying it. Thanks for to all I did back when I ran, up Mount Moosilauke in New Hampshire.
That's incredible. I've just like gotten so much out of this conversation. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you wanted people to know that I somehow missed?
I hope you don't see this as like my bragging about how awesome I am. I hope that people understand that this is the opposite. That I took the lamest person on earth and made myself believe I wasn't. And that can happen with anything that you fear or feel pain about. Now, that's where the Stoics do say you're responsible for your own emotions. The nice thing about what I've learned through the art of rhetoric is that you can talk yourself into believing things that you actually want to believe, including, most important, faith in yourself.
That is the most important thing. I couldn't agree more. Jay Heinrichs, if people want to work with you or they want to learn more, where should they go?
Well, go to your independent bookstore and ask why they don't have my book. But I have a Substack newsletter like everybody else where you can get the tools of persuasion for free. And I'm on all the fine social media places, of course.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Galina, I love what the way you conduct a conversation. You're showing the love.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.